Little is known about my grandpa, which is strange, but it's not like he's ever been a person of interest. All that we knew was that he was in the Army. After that, he suffered from PTSD and died under mysterious conditions. The end. It was December 2017. Nathan and I were home decorating for Christmas. Mom was out on a shopping spree. We were jerking around when Des showed up, a longtime friend of mine. With the three of us in the house, something was bound to happen. Nathan decided to go call his girlfriend, Anne. They'd been going out a couple of days now. "Dude, who's this?" Des pointed to the urn that was situated under the tree. "That's Grandpa. You can touch him. I know you're into freaky stuff." But it was already too late. His hands were all over the thing. Des had already opened the urn. Looks like drugs. What do you think would happen if I snorted some of it? Think you'll get high or just dead? He took a handful out of the urn. I inched closer to try and take it away from him. "Dude, come on. I don't think you'd get high." "Probably not." He raised an eyebrow and smirked. I knew that look. We'd been friends for over a decade, and I could tell when he had a messed up idea. He was an idiot. Maybe so was I. That's when we got along. Plan was simple. Get Nathan to snort the grandpa ashes and get first-hand experience of what would happen. Chances are, nothing would happen. I got the camera ready while Des planted some ash residue on the top lip and nostril to act like he'd already snorted some. With the ash residue on his nose, it was go time. Knowing my little brother, he'd be too innocent and too easy to fool. "What are you guys up to?" he asked, when he saw Des wiping his nose and howling. "Whew! Now that you're done taking care of business, my boy, how about some of this?" Des grabbed him by the neck, leading him to the table where lines of something were spread out. "I don't know, man. I don't think he can handle it," I said, looking at Nathan as I gaslighted him to get a reaction. See, the thing is, if he'd known me better, he would have seen right through me. I don't even let him smoke weed with us. Why would I let him have any of whatever this was? I saw him bite down. I can. Beating his chest, trying to boost his bravado, he lowered his head, taking a deep breath and snorting the whole line. Des and I both burst out laughing. Nathan was confused for a while. Then he went stiff, his body starting to convulse. He fell to the ground, rolling and blinking rapidly. "What's happening? What's going on?" Des shoved me to the side and tried to steady him. "Get some water," he told me. I came back with a glass of water and he downed it. "What the hell, bro?" He looked at me. "What? I was thirsty." Then he proceeded to slap Nathan. "Wake up! Wake up!" Nathan continued to jerk his body. Then he went limp. There was a deafening silence in the room. Beads of sweat dribbled down my face. I splashed him with water and he woke up. What'd you guys do?" he yelled at us. We told him what had happened. We couldn't keep a straight face. We laughed about it. Then Nathan started wearing more than one jacket. He claimed he was cold. We shrugged it off. He'd come and snuggle with Mom during movies. "Mom's warm," he said, and eventually fell asleep. It was weird. The dude was 17. Still, I was getting an uneasy feeling that I kept shutting off. At times, he'd complain about how his girl, Anne, was not giving him much warmth. I assumed he was talking about sex or something and getting his blood going. How little I knew. Nathan stopped going out, and Anne stopped calling. He had quieted down about being cold. Around midnight, I'd catch him in front of Mom's room, snuggling something like a blanket. Every time I'd knock on his door, he'd come rushing out. "Everything okay, bud? What's up with Anne? Y'all break up?" He'd just act like everything was okay. Then one day, while we were watching a movie, Des leaned over and told me, "Dude, I heard from Cass's boyfriend Diego, who went with Brian to the theater, about how Matt's cousin, you know, his brother's a little slow. He heard Kelly say, Anne's missing. I don't know, dude. It's kind of weird." That was news to me. Nathan told me that everything was fine, and he had just spoken to Anne. I think he's lying. We need to check out his room. Des looked at me like I was high. He sized me up from head to toe. I mean, I was high, but he was making it a little obvious. I'm not about to go in your brother's room and check out his weird collection of who knows what. Hey, what are you doing? Let go. Nathan had fallen asleep, snuggled up with our mom on the couch like he did sometimes, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. A strong stench wafted from Nathan's room as we approached. We had to cover our noses. That's nasty, man. Does he crap the bed or something? Ugh. I turned around, looking for something out of place. Des had pulled his blanket and found the source of the smell. There was what appeared to be skin, neatly laid there. Parts of it were jagged. It was signs that whoever had skinned the person was an amateur. "What are you guys doing?" We both spun around and found Nathan standing there, eyes hollow and devoid of emotions or recognition. He tilted his head to the side. "Oh, I see you found Anne's blanket. She was saying I was getting under her skin, so I got under her skin all right. See, Tate, I've been feeling chilly for a while now, but Mom's home, and Anne's skin helps me sleep better at night. There's 2 more fabrics to that skin blanket, though." He took a few strides towards us, snuggling the thing, bloodshot eyes watching us. You killed Anne and took her skin? What, are you sick?" The whole scene made my head hurt, realization dawning on me. He was possessed. He had to be. "You messed up, man. Like, really messed up." Des pulled the skin by the corner. There were bloodstains and bruises. The thing was flappy. He scrunched his nose. "He's capable of that. What else is he capable of? He killed Anne and skinned her. That's just sick, man." Nathan giggled. "Nuh-uh. Anne's alive. I love her. So I didn't kill her. She killed herself to keep me warm. After the whole ordeal with the powder, I was feeling cold, you know." My heart sank, blame crashing into me. "We did this. We did. We need to fix it. We need to fix you." I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, heart hammering in my chest. My breath was strained, and I went in for a hug. "We?" Des asked, while trying to get the cogs in his head working. "What you mean, we? Nuh-uh, brah." I watched Nathan get in bed and pull Anne's skin over his body as he let out a deep sigh. "Close the door on your way out," he said, pulling it tightly around his body, almost snuggling it. He was smiling. "Look, you might be wondering why we were so calm about all this. Some of it was the weed, but some of it was us realizing we couldn't tell anybody, because we had done this. Dez's place was the best place to think without Nathan eavesdropping. We didn't want to make him suspect us. When our heads were cleared, we yelled and kicked things and cussed at our stupidity. So your grandpa possessed your brother, and now he's doing his bidding. Your brother's a crybaby. This can't be him." Des was going up and down, biting his nails. And dead people are cold, meaning that's why he's feeling cold, and he only finds warmth in those he loves, like your mom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. It went to voicemail. I tried it, and it went straight to voicemail again. Des told me to put my phone on record because he had a weird feeling. We needed to do something, but without a solid plan, things could get out of hand. That's how we did things, though. Act now and think later. Des was quick to Google some exorcist stuff and phrases. We got holy water, salt, and crosses, and we ran like hell back to my place. The lights were off, which was strange. We tried our best to sneak in and turn the lights on. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his skin blanket wrapped around him. The whole room reeked of decay, but he seemed to be asleep. Slowly as possible, we made our way towards him. Just as we came to within arm's reach, he woke up. His eyes were blood red, and he went feral. He jumped up, gnashing his teeth and fingernails in my face. He was clawing with that thing dangling off his shoulder like a cape. Dez yanked him by the skin blanket, trying to get him off of me. Oh my God, it's so slippery. It stinks. Nathan turned around and headbutted him, and he fell with his nose bleeding. I splashed him with the holy water, and he shrieked, retreating to the corner. His voice went deep. Son, don't. It's Grandpa Max. I'm so cold. I splashed him some more, and he whimpered, demurring as his demeanor changed. Tate, what's happening? What are you doing? It was my brother's voice, his eyes pleading. Please, help me. I'm so cold. Everything around me became muffled. I looked at what I was doing, then back to the person before me. I'm sorry. Dez pushed me to the side and threw salt on him, yelling, Exi ergo transgressor, exi ergo transgressor, exi subtutor plene omne dolo et fabulace. Vertitus immiscique innocentium persuator. Nathan growled through gritted teeth as Dez went on speaking that faux Latin. A cacophony of words rained down on us. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. Lights began to flicker. He grunted like a feral animal as drool dribbled down his chin. Ni vecigu la lordum de la absimo. Nathan's body twisted and jerked. He cocked his head to the side and ground his teeth. We kept throwing salt and holy water on him, Dez reciting his phrases. There was yelling back and forth in a deep, rumbling voice as Dez went on. Then everything went silent. Nathan fell to the ground, limp. Is it over? Is it done? I didn't respond, but I dashed to my brother's side. I hugged him tight, and as I held him, he seemed to come back to himself some. What happened? Why am I wet and on the floor? When we told him about what had happened, he sobbed and threw away the skin blanket. His eyes looked droopy, the bags under them showing that he hadn't been sleeping much. A week later, Anne's case was closed. I went to a public phone to give the police an anonymous tip, and that was the last we heard of it. When my phone rang, I looked down and saw it was Dez. Sup? I asked. He took a deep breath. This feels way too easy, don't you think? I mean, how it all went down. He waited for my response, and when he got none, he continued. See, right now, I'm in Nathan's room. Remember when we asked what happened, and he said he didn't recall anything? But then I asked if he knew any Latin prior to speaking it. You know, that stuff he was yelling back at us. He said it wasn't Latin. It was Spanish. I rolled my eyes. What are you getting at? Cogs in my brain starting to grind and sink. Dez paused, but continued with a deep sigh. That's the thing. My incantation was in Latin. He was responding in Spanish, meaning he remembers. I know he says he doesn't remember, but what if he's lying? What if he was never possessed? What if... The line went dead after that, the beating of my heart echoing through my eardrums. My hands were slippery with sweat. I had trouble dialing his number. I tried calling Dez back, but his phone never went through. I received 3 documents on my phone from him, and that was the end of it. I work for a commercial cleaning company who specializes in cleaning up rundown, abandoned buildings and getting them ready for refurbishment. We were hired to clean out an old hospital that had been abandoned for some 20-odd years. My team, of which there were 3 of us, was assigned to the behavioral health unit, or, more simply, the psych ward. While I was clearing out rooms of dusty old linens and mattress pads, I found an old marble journal tucked under one of the pads. I opened it and flipped through quickly and saw that it was about half filled with journal entries. I thought it was pretty cool, so I slid it in my back pocket so I could read it later and went back to work. Totally forgot about it until I got in the car and drove home. When I got home, I decided to read it, and what I found inside was terrifying, mostly because of the similarities between what was in the journal and what we'd been cleaning up earlier today. I'll go over the connections between what I found in the journal and what I saw today later, but before that, let me share the story. I'm going to try and stay as true to the writing in the journal as possible, so that means some things may be a little misspelled and some grammar might not be perfect. If it's underlined on the page, I'll underline it here. Written all in caps, I'll type it all in caps. So, let's get started. Day 1, 12 p.m. The ER nurse lied to me. She said I could leave after 3 days. The doctor here, though, she said she decides when I leave. She said I won't be out in 3 days. I don't want to be here. I don't belong here. Day 2, 11 a.m. I've been here 24 hours. I don't want to be here. I don't belong here. They do patient checks every 15 minutes. If you're in your room, they knock on the door. They don't care about the time. I can't sleep. They give me my meds and they say that I have mood stabilizers in them for me tonight. I miss Taya. I miss my bed. This is my world now. Day 3, 11 a.m. It's been 42 hours. I'm feeling a little better. I broke down last night. I played some Monopoly earlier and it was a lot of fun. After I broke down, I was given meds to calm me down. I laughed for the first time since coming here. Day 5. I'm okay. I'll be okay. Day 7. It's time to go home. They won't let me leave. I don't know why. I ask and they ignore me. Just want to go home. Day 10. There was a huge boom outside. None of the nurses reacted. They just carried on as normal. All I can see out the window is black smoke. Day 14. We found a nurse in the hallway this morning. He was dead. We've been seeing less and less each day, but since we found him, we haven't seen anyone else. Day 27. There hasn't been a single nurse or doctor or security or anyone at all since we found the nurse in the hallway. The door knocking hasn't stopped, though. Every 15 minutes, if a room door is closed, it will knock. Food still shows up. Meds are still showing up in the medicine window. Day 28. Gerald tried to jump through the window at the nurse's station. Something we couldn't see stopped him and dragged him back out. He was dragged all the way to the quiet room. We hesitantly followed and watched as he was hauled up into a slab bed. We watched the straps wrap themselves around him and tie him down. Then the room door slammed shut. That was this morning. It's almost lights out. We could still hear him screaming. Poor guy. I guess security is still here. Day 32. It's been over a month. We put the body of the nurse in Gerald's room, since he doesn't need it anymore. Gerald's still wrapped up down the hall in the quiet room. He's still screaming. I don't know how. Out the window is just smoke. Large, rolling, jet black columns of smoke, painting the sky a large swath of uncolor. We're still fed. I don't know where it comes from, but it always shows up at the end of the hallway and wheels itself down to us. Day whatever. It's been a while. A lot's happened. A lot of lights have stopped working. The knocking never does. Some of the windows have cracks in them. Don't know how. None of us could even scratch them. There's no more outside. It's just black. The smoke took over the sky weeks ago. I'm really not sure about time. Haven't seen natural light since. We only know days because the lights, what few we have left, dim for a bit every few hours or so. The water stopped getting hot a few days ago. With the lights, the windows, and now the water, it's almost like this place is dying. Gerald stopped screaming eventually. Still strapped down. We can see him moving from time to time, so we know he's alive. Don't know how he survives, but I do know that none of us want to piss off whatever's doing this. Day, I don't even know. We have to get out of here. Doris went into her room and the door closed behind her. It won't open. Something unseen dragged her to the bed and held her there. We watched as the bed made itself with her in it. That wouldn't have been so bad, except that when it was done, Doris was just a red smear between the sheets and the bed. There's not even a bulge where her body should be. She's just gone. The door stayed closed ever since. No one's brave enough to go in their room now. We're all just staying in the day room for now. Been a few days. I lost this book for a bit. It's not that strange. Sometimes stuff just goes missing here. We just assume it's the housekeepers that got it. Strange part is that I found it in Gerald's room, next to the body of the nurse. Now, he's just a semi-wet pile of meat and bones. No idea why that room won't clean itself. Lost a couple other folks to housekeepers. That's what we call what happened to Doris. Maybe we'll try to look in Gerald's room for more stuff we lost. Day after last entry. It was a bad idea. The nurse wasn't dead. I don't know how it could be. It was literally just a pile of meat and bones. And yet, we were in Gerald's room looking for lost stuff. Ron bumped the nurse's body and it jumped at him. It dug its bone fingers into his neck. A wet squelching noise accompanied it every moment. Ron strangled, gurgled, screamed, but he quickly stopped. I'm ashamed to say that we ran. We left him there, with the nurse thing still digging away at his neck. We closed and barricaded the door. Day, I don't know anymore. It's been a few days. I can still hear the nurse thing moving around in Gerald's room. Every now and again we hear wet slaps against the floor. The flies are terrible. Clark got taken by the housekeepers. A window broke out of nowhere. It just shattered. Some of the smoke came in, just a little bit. It's like a creeping miasma. It slithered its way across the ceiling and just sat there. We used a table to block the window and keep any more smoke from getting in. Now we're just watching it. Tay, who cares? We need to leave. Jenny decided to touch the smoke, and it grabbed her like a snake. A thin trail came out and coiled itself around her outstretched arm and down her body and dragged her into itself. It's unthinkable how such a small amount of smoke could consume somebody like that. I say consumed because that's what it did. It ate her. Not all at once. And not quickly. We tried to save her. Tried to drag her back down to us. Even with all of us pulling, we couldn't get her to budge. I think I heard something in her pop or break or dislocate when we were pulling. But we couldn't save her. So we had to watch. We had to watch as it slowly pulled her into itself. There was no noise, except for Jenny's screeches and screams. But it did eat her, eventually. I don't think I'll ever forget her screams. We stay away from it now. It stays on the ceiling, moving around, but never comes down. We're now living in fear of yet another unexplained thing. Too long. The nurse, no idea. Was he ever dead? Was he ever even human? Gerald is not dead somehow, but he's still strapped down. Doris, housekeeping. Aspen, housekeeping. Donald, housekeeping. Ron, the nurse thing. Jenny, eaten by the smoke. Daniel, eaten by the smoke. We're leaving. We've lost too many people to just sit here trying to survive. We've unblocked the window and hopped out. There's a small landing with an access hatch and a half-story below. I'm leaving this book here as a way to ensure that we're not forgotten. If you find this, I didn't live to come back for it. Goodbye. Note: this journal was found in the room of a mental patient who jumped out of his window to his death. I came back. I didn't write that. I don't know who did, but it wasn't me. I found this journal right where I left it. It's just me now. We didn't even make it out of the hospital. I came back because I'd rather die here, where at least I'm taken care of. We were exploring the hospital for about a week, I'd say. This place hasn't changed much. The black smoke is still here. It moves around the ceiling, following me. I feel like it's watching me, like a predator watching its prey. Not actively hunting, but just waiting for any little slip up so it can bag itself an easy meal. It won't be from me. I guess I should explain what happened and how everyone died. When we left, there were still 6 of us. Me, Jules, Richard, Alberto, Gwen, and Ray. I don't know what we expected to find when we left, but there was no way for us to guess what we saw. Narrator's note: the entire next page is full of scribbled out bits. Just woke up from a nap. Something more is going on. I took a nap after writing that last page, and when I woke up, I saw it was completely scribbled out. I didn't do that. I guess something didn't like what I had to say. I can't even remember what I wrote, honestly. I can't remember most of yesterday. This place hurts to be in. Hurts to think about. It just hurts. Good news, though. The food still shows up. It's been 2 days. I guess I'll try again to write down what happened when I left. Outside the window was a small drop down to an access hatch. We quickly filed out and fell down. I couldn't help but notice no more smoke made its way through the window. Even now, sitting here writing this, I don't have the window blocked. Doesn't much make a difference, if I'm honest. There's no weather. There's no wind. Everything is still. I don't hear any animals or bugs. No cars, no people. Just silence. The world is so empty. Back to what happened. We hopped down to the access shaft. We managed to open it and drop down to the floor below. I'd tell you what floor number, but I honestly don't know. When we hopped down, we were in a hallway. It was long and semi-lit. I guess the rest of the hospital was falling apart, just like our unit. Half the lights were either flickering dimly or just out. Still enough light to see what we were going through. The hallway had elevators on one side and a few rooms on the other. The rooms were labeled Radiology 1, 2, 3, and so on. Throughout the entire hallway was a low humming and beeping, the sound of medical equipment left on. Being all too familiar with house cleaning, we didn't dare go into any of the rooms. Gwen wanted to take the elevator, but the rest of us said no. There's no telling what horror that would lead to. Once we got our bearings, we chose a direction and started walking. It was dark. We could barely see the floor. I guess that's why we didn't notice at first. When we did notice, we were too terrified to move. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes. The hallway just went on and on. Every now and again we would pass a sign with an arrow and the word visitation on it, pointing the way we were going. Occasionally, we would come to a large intersection with multiple hallways leading off. It was in one of these intersections we noticed what was around us. All over the walls were semi-dark stains, the color of dried blood. Everywhere on the floor, we found wet piles of rotting meat and bones. Like our nurse thing. It's amazing how we didn't smell it, but once we noticed, it was all we could smell. It was horrible. Just thinking about it makes me want to puke, even now. Sorry, I had to go throw up. Caught a whiff of the smell. I didn't want to think about where it came from. Richard and Jules, we were stood in the intersection, surrounded by potential monsters. We had no idea how long these things could last like this. Hell, they were literally half rotted. Once we found our nerve, we decided to move on. It's honestly a miracle we hadn't bumped into a pile of them by now. Our luck couldn't last forever, though. In the dark confines of a particularly tight hallway, Richard lost his balance and ended up stepping on a meat pile. It instantly rose up and swallowed him. More an amorphous blob of meat and bones than anything resembling a human. His scream was quick, but loud. Loud enough to wake the dead. Unfortunately, that's not just an expression. Apparently noise also sets them off. Two more of the meat blobs suddenly launched themselves at the closest person. Jules was gone in an instant. The blobs fully enclosed her before she could even scream. Richard was a bit slower. We watched as whatever bones the blob had forced their way into and through him. A long bone through the neck, what looked like maybe fingers digging into his guts. A couple of ribs into his thigh. On and on. We watched in horror for what felt like hours, too scared to move. When he finally stopped moving, we managed to collect our senses and run. Gwen. A few days later, we had moved a few floors down via the staircase. We were never able to take one the entire way. There was always a blockage forcing us out into the hospital proper. Through more halls and rooms, we weren't sure that we could make it out. Gwen was leading us through the hall. She took a turn, and all we heard was the faintest squeak. Then nothing. We waited around the corner for a while before carefully peeking our heads out. About a foot from where the wall turned into a massive wall of black smoke. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall. There was no way through. Gwen must have walked right into it, gone before she even realized it. Poor kid. Ray had the worst fate of anyone, except maybe Gerald. Ray was leading the remains of our group, just Alberto, me, and Ray, through the kitchen. This was about a day after Gwen, and we were walking through the kitchen, past stoves and burners and rotten food. Ray saw something on the counter, I still don't know what, and reached for it. His hand was cut in half, all 4 fingers gone to the knuckle. Next, the skin on his arm was peeled off, like skin on a fish. He watched his arm get sliced into small sections, unable to move. Alberto and I tried to pull him away, but we couldn't. After his arm, Ray was haphazardly thrown onto the counter, and the rest of his body was cut up, prepared like meat at a butcher shop. Saw a few pieces get flung into a pot on the stove before Albert and I ran while the cooking went to work on the rest of Ray. I skipped my meals the next few days after I got back, just in case. Alberto was just unlucky. After what happened to Ray, we decided to go back to our unit. It was all too much. Alberto and I quickly backtracked. A few days later, we found a staircase that said, "To BHU Psych." We were almost back. Running up the stairs, Alberto didn't notice a blob on the next step up. Stepped right on it. Of course, it launched itself onto him. It ended up tackling Alberto over the railing and down into the empty central column of the staircase. They fell, Alberto and the blob. They fell what must have been 10 stories. Of course, we couldn't have been that high up. I watched them tumble down, the blob ripping chunks out of him. Then I noticed what was at the bottom, a roiling, bubbling, almost boiling pool of black smoke. all the way down. Alberto and the blob were plummeting towards it. He fell quietly. The meat blob fell in, and everything was the opposite of silence. How I got back. I guess these things don't like each other. When the meat blob fell into the black smoke, at first there was a blinding light. I can't describe the color. It was beyond white. That's all that comes into my mind when I try to recall what it looked like. Beyond white is the best I can do. With the light came the noise. It was deafening. The sound of flies buzzing so loud I couldn't hear myself scream. I was lucky to open my eyes quickly enough to see the black smoke rocketing up towards me. I quickly threw myself back against the wall as the smoke shot up past me and continued on upwards, filling the central column. I admit it took me longer than I'm proud of to regain control of myself. The light, the noise, the powerful wind from the rush of smoke. It was almost too much. I felt the smoke glaring at me. It was angry. It wanted to eat. But it was hurt. If I was more of an action hero, I would maybe do something with that information. But I'm not. So I ran. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the door marking floor 3. I ran through the halls, following the signs for the BHU, thanking whatever power above that all these doors were unlocked. I crashed through the twin doors leading back to where this all started. I collapsed onto the floor, finally feeling some semblance of safety. I don't know how long I was out for. I only realized after I woke up. All the doors that were unlocked, they all locked behind me as I ran. Now I'm stuck here again. It's been a few days, and I'm alone. Gerald's still here, of course, still strapped down. He's a little more than skin and bones now, but he's still moving. Water's still cold, window's still broken, smoke still follows me, food still rolls down the hall towards me. I did learn something through all of this, though. The realization of false hope is more damaging than no hope at all. So for now, I'll just live here with no hope of getting out. I'll be okay. That's a whole story. Pretty creepy if you ask me. When I was cleaning up earlier today, I noticed the ceiling was smudged with long black smoke stuff. Windows were cracked, with one window leading to an access hatch broken open. In the solitary holding room, I guess that's what they call the quiet room, there was one bed with its straps still tied down. Nothing on the bed, though. Few of the rooms had linen that were completely stained with something. Honestly, couldn't tell you what. Walking through the hospital, I also noticed a lot of stains on the floor. I can't say for certain, but I've had to clean up dead bodies before, and the stains in the hospital looked exactly like the kind of stains a body leaves when it's left to rot for a long time. After reading that, and comparing what happened in the journal with the kind of mess I found, I'm honestly considering calling out tomorrow. Maybe even just calling out for however long it takes to finish cleaning the hospital. The taxi jolted to a stop in front of the hotel, a monolith of grandeur and forgotten glamour. I paid the driver and stepped out, scanning the facade that had stood the test of time, hiding within the walled secrets that the city had tried to bury. My name's Michael Turner. I'm a detective by trade and obsession. I guess you could call me grizzled, hardened by years of chasing shadows in this unforgiving city. Today, I was to face an enigma that had danced just out of reach of law enforcement for decades. Room 313. As I walked towards the ornate entrance, memories of my last failed investigation ambushed me. I blinked against the sudden sting in my eyes. Emily, my partner and the more optimistic half of our duo, was gone. Our last case had taken her away, stolen by a faceless criminal we'd never managed to apprehend. Her loss was a wound, fresh and raw, and it had only served to drive my determination deeper. Not for revenge, but for justice, for answers. And that's what led me to room 313. Check-in was smooth. The concierge barely betrayed any surprise when I requested the key to the infamous room. His eyes held a flicker of something, though. Pity, maybe fear, doesn't matter. I grabbed the key and headed towards the elevator, the gleaming brass number 313 engraved on it, a constant reminder of my purpose. The hallway leading to 313 was surprisingly mundane. The carpet was dull, nondescript patterns that seemed completely at odds with the stories tied to it. It reminded me of the countless crime scenes I'd been to over the years. The mundane wrapped around the macabre. Reality dancing a deadly waltz with the unseen. I slid the key into the lock, the door creaking open, that had become a character in the city's darkest nightmares. I dropped my bag by the bed, the simple action resonating in the silence. Room 313. How many lives had it claimed? How many stories had it silenced? Each death was a question, each victim a mystery. I stared around, my eyes falling on a picture hanging on the wall. It was an old black and white shot of the hotel in its heyday, a beacon of opulence and power, now a monument to death. I moved to the window, staring out at the sprawling cityscape. Lights twinkled. Life moved on, oblivious to the room of death I now occupied. I couldn't help but think of Emily. Would we have cracked this case together? The thought was bitter, the loss suddenly immeasurable. After setting my bag down, I began the initial survey of room 313. My eyes swept across every inch of the room, every corner, every crevice, looking for clues. Anything could be a clue, a piece of a decades-old puzzle that had eluded so many before me. As I walked deeper into the room, I couldn't shake off the cold draft that seemed to follow me. It wasn't a steady, natural current, but erratic gusts that made the thin curtains flutter like disturbed spirits. I went over to the window, expecting to find it slightly ajar, but it was sealed shut, the paint around the edges thick and uncracked. The chill wasn't coming from outside. It was emanating from within the room itself. There was a peculiar hum in the air, a low, throbbing vibration that tickled the back of my skull. It was almost imperceptible, drowned out by the muted sounds of the city below. But in the quiet moments between the distant honks of traffic and the occasional murmur of hotel staff in the corridors, I could hear it, persistent, unyielding. Next came the lights. They flickered with a life of their own, dancing shadows across the wall in a haunting ballet. Initially, I chalked it up to the hotel's old wiring, but there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that sent shivers down my spine. They seemed to react, dimming when I ventured towards certain corners, brightening when I approached others. And then there was the noise, soft whispers that drifted through the room, incoherent but palpable, a sudden clattering like something metallic dropping on the floor, even though nothing seemed out of place. The distant sound of children's laughter, chilling in its mirth. None of it made sense, yet all of it set my nerves on edge. I spent hours documenting everything, the cold drafts, the lights, the sounds. My recorder never left my side, a faithful companion that captured the eerie symphony of room 313. Yet as I sat on the edge of the ancient bed, the weight of the room's history pressing down on me, I felt a flicker of doubt. Could I really do this? Could I solve a mystery that seemed more rooted in the supernatural than the physical? As darkness fell and the strange noises of 313 grew louder, I slipped into a fitful sleep. With it came the dreams, though Dreams feels like too soft a word. These were nightmares, woven with the tragic tapestry of Room 313's history. Each night I found myself in a different area, witnessing events that I knew were reenactments of the murders that had made 313 famous. I was there, but not as myself, rather an invisible bystander, forced to watch the horror unfold with grim helplessness. One night I stood in the room as it was in 1940. I watched in horror as a woman in a flapper dress was strangled by an unseen force. Her terrified eyes locked onto mine as she clawed at her throat, her gasps for air growing weaker until they were no more. Another night I was back in the 60s. A businessman was pacing nervously in the room. Suddenly the lights went out, and when they flickered back, his lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, his eyes wide open in an eternal stare of fear. Each dream was a horrific puzzle piece, a chilling glimpse into the atrocities that Room 313 had witnessed. They weren't just dreams. They were echoes of the past, reaching out to me, pleading for me to uncover their truth. While they provided crucial insights into each murder, they also took a heavy toll on my mental health. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the echoes of their final screams still lingering in my ears. Each morning was a struggle to pull myself together, to remind myself of the task at hand, of the justice these souls deserved. The boundaries between sleep and wakefulness started to blur, and the shadows of Room 313 seemed to creep into my consciousness, even during the day. The constant whispering, the flickering lights, the reoccurring nightmares began to gnaw at my sanity. My hands shook as I pored over my notes, the victims' faces merging into one another, their terror becoming my own. The distinction between night and day began to blur in Room 313 as the supernatural happenings became my reality. The room, like an entity in its own right, started revealing itself to me. Ghostly apparitions began to manifest during the waking hours, their eternal forms flickering in and out of existence, like phantoms caught in a limbo between the past and the present. A spectral woman in a flapper dress would point to a hidden compartment under the bed, leading me to a pearl necklace, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. The translucent figure of the businessman from the 60s would appear next to the window, his hands reaching out towards the view outside, where a long-forgotten sign revealed the name of his company. Each apparition led me towards clues, their spectral guidance a chilling beacon in the darkness. As I pieced together their stories, their ties to Room 313, an eerie pattern began to emerge. The victims, all from different eras, shared one commonality: their birthday. Strange enough, it was the same as mine, a chilling coincidence that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if 313 had chosen me, not just to reveal its secrets, but also to tie me to it in a deadly narrative. It seemed impossible, surreal even, but the evidence was right there. Birth certificates, diaries, newspaper clippings, all painting a chilling picture of shared fates and cursed timelines. It was like a dark thread spun from the loom of destiny, binding all of us to Room 313. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat amidst the clues, the links, the ghostly echoes of shared birthdays. I couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Was I just another character in this twisted tale, my fate tied to Room 313, just like the victims before me? Or was I here to break the cycle, to finally shed light on the dark enigma that had claimed so many lives? As I delved deeper into the mystery of Room 313, an undercurrent of unease grew stronger, wrapping itself around the room like a chilling shroud. The once benign whispers turned into malicious growls, The temperature dropped dramatically, and an ominous feeling of being watched began to haunt me. One afternoon I was flipping through a victim's diary, and the room's chandelier began to swing violently, almost as if in protest. Before I could react, the heavy fixture plummeted down, crashing onto the spot where I'd been sitting seconds ago. The close call left my heart pounding in my chest, my mind grappling with the reality and the danger I'd narrowly avoided. The very next day, while I was studying the faded pictures of a victim, an icy gust of wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the lights. The darkness was suffocating, impenetrable. A floorboard creaked, followed by a muffled sound of an approaching entity. I held my breath, feeling an intangible presence closing in. As a searing pain shot through my arm, I ignited my flashlight, revealing a shard of glass slicing into my skin. A mere second later, and it could have pierced my heart. Each encounter with the room's vengeful spirits left me with a chilling realization. The ghosts of room 313 were growing more hostile. Their spectral warnings had turned into lethal threats. It was as if they were warning me off, their spectral forms forming deadly traps around each clue I discovered. But why? Didn't they want me to solve the mystery? Weren't they crying out for justice? Their stories begging to be heard? The malevolent resistance puzzled me, only fueling my determination to seek the truth. While going through a trunk filled with old photographs, I stumbled upon an aged black and white picture of a grand party. It was held in room 313, which was far more opulent and lively than its present state. At the center of the revelry stood a distinguished man, no doubt the hotel's founder, surrounded by well-wishers. The back of the photograph bore the date, the same birthday that connected me, the founder, and the victims. An unsettling realization dawned upon me. Room 313 was where the hotel's founder, who also shared our peculiar birthday, held his grand birthday celebration. But amidst the joy and the laughter, a dark cloud loomed, a tragedy that would forever taint these walls. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the room, I found a secret drawer camouflaged in the intricate woodwork. It held a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. The script inside revealed the chilling past of room 313. The entries were from the hotel's founder, documenting his life, and more importantly, his birthdays. One entry in particular was smudged with something that looked suspiciously like dried tears. It told a harrowing tale of a birthday party gone horribly wrong, an act of betrayal that ended in a bloody feud, resulting in several deaths, all born on the shared date. The founder himself, guilt-ridden and desolate, met a tragic end within the cursed walls of room 313. A chill ran down my spine. That was the genesis of the curse. The room, steeped in guilt and fury of the bloody birthday event, became a vengeful entity, forever haunted by its past. It was as if the special energies were anchored to that fatal event, repeating the cycle of death on a shared date. And here I was, another soul born on that cursed day, standing amidst the spectral remains of the past. I was targeted, drawn into this macabre dance of death and hauntings by a date that was supposed to be a cause of celebration. Armed with my newly discovered evidence, I marched to the hotel's management office. The door to the manager's office was imposing, heavy mahogany that spoke of the grandeur this place had once held. I knocked, and the door creaked open, revealing a man hunched over a mountain of paperwork. "Detective Turner, what can I do for you?" he said, barely glancing up from his desk. I tossed the worn-out journal on top of the paperwork. "Explain this," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. He looked startled, his eyes widening as he picked up the old book, leafing through the brittle pages. His face went pale as he read, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, I'm aware of the room's history," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "The tragic events that took place here are a sad part of the hotel's past. But you didn't think it necessary to inform me of this, I reported, anger flaring in my voice. The room is cursed. It's a death trap for those born on a specific date. My birthday. I assure you, Detective, we had no knowledge of this birthday curse, he responded, though his gaze wavered, hinting at deceit. We thought the hauntings were just urban legend. But the clues added up differently. The man was lying. The hotel had been capitalizing on the room's morbid history, using it as a selling point to attract guests who were intrigued by the supernatural. I slammed my hand down on the desk, causing him to jump. You exploited the victims suffering for profit. You knowingly put people in danger. And for what? Couple extra bucks? He looked at me then, a hint of remorse flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. Instead, he bowed his head in guilty silence. The confrontation left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had to uncover the truth, a truth the hotel manager had chosen to ignore. Room 313 wasn't just a paranormal oddity. It was a death trap. As I stood before the room, its dark aura seemed to pulsate with unseen energy, as if awaiting my return. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed open the door, stepping into the room that had now become an all-too-familiar haunting ground. With the room's secrets unveiled, the atmosphere felt more oppressive than before. The walls, stained with untold pain and sorrow, seemed to close in on me, but I squared my shoulders, fortified my resolve, and spoke into the silent gloom. I know what happened here. I know about the curse. A cold wind swept through the room, sending shivers down my spine. Shadows danced in the corners, forming spectral silhouettes of their victims. I know you're all victims of a horrendous betrayal. I promise you, I will bring justice to your untimely deaths. The response was immediate. A surge of paranormal activity washed over me. The ethereal figures appeared, their ghostly faces contorted in pain and anger. One, more solid than the rest, stepped forward. The Founder. His spectral eyes were full of torment as they bore into mine. "We seek peace," his voice echoed through the room, a chilling sound that seemed to come from every direction. "Can you offer us that, Detective?" "I can, and I will," I responded, holding his spectral gaze. "But I need your help. I need to know everything." A moment of silence passed before the room convulsed violently. The chandelier swayed, lights flickered, and a cold gust blew around me, turning into a vortex. I felt the room closing in on me, the darkness creeping over my senses. "No!" I shouted above the cacophony, the room shaking as if the very foundations of the hotel were rebelling against me. "I won't be your next victim. I'm here to help you." With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled myself towards the door, fighting against the unseen forces trying to keep me. The door handle was ice cold, numbing my fingers. I yanked it open and tumbled outside, gasping for breath. As I lay on the corridor, the carpeted floor underneath me, the room settled. The door slammed shut. The final showdown had been draining, the room testing my resolve and nearly claiming me in the process. The following days were a blur of restless activity. I pored over every bit of evidence I had on room 313, cross-referencing with public records and local news archives. The daunting puzzle began to piece itself together, painting a bleak picture of a hotel exploiting its dark history for profit. I arranged a press conference. The thought of standing in front of the media, my words echoing in their microphones, sent a shiver down my spine. But the victims deserved their stories to be heard. As the cameras began to roll and the reporters hushed, I took a deep breath and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today, not as Detective Michael Turner, but as a spokesperson for the forgotten souls of room 313. I told them everything. The birthday curse, the victims, the spectral encounters, Most importantly, the hotel manager's role in exploiting the tragedy. Their silence told me they were shocked, but I could also see the wheels turning, connecting the dots. After the press conference, I confronted the hotel manager again. This time, I had the eyes of the public on my side. You've played with lives, disregarded the dead, and for what? I spat out, slamming the damned evidence on his desk. A bit of profit? A little thrill? The manager, pale and shaken, had no choice but to accept responsibility. We'll take steps to correct this, to remember the victims properly, he stammered, his previous arrogance long gone. The hotel was forced to address its haunted past. Room 313 was sealed with a plaque put out as a memorial to the victims, acknowledging their unjust demise. A promise of reform was made to prevent further exploitation of the paranormal events within the hotel. As I left the hotel for the last time, I glanced back at room 313. There was a silence, a sense of relief that seemed to resonate from it. The victims were no longer a tragic tale spun for profit. Their memories were respected, their stories heard. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd carried their stories, their hopes for justice, and we had won. As I walked away, the haunting echoes of room 313 seemed quieter, softer, a step towards peace, towards redemption, for them as well as for me. My name's John. I'm in my 20s and I just moved out of my parents' house. I'm in search of lower cost living, and I decided to move to a small town in Rainville Bay, southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses, all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something weird. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has a peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously, at about 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then he goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. My curiosity was piqued, and I really wanted to know what it was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition, ancient enough for only the oldest or elderliest to remember? I don't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who often shows up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this has happened more than once. One day, gathering my courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly, I walked up to his door and knocked. He opened with a friendly enough smile, and I hesitantly started asking him about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment, his eyes seemed pretty distant, as if recalling something. Then, he simply told me it was a family tradition, nothing for me to worry about. Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at the small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed some light on it. However, my efforts were in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details on Rainville Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light his candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle could go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, at exactly 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense work day, and I really needed to sleep, but I just couldn't. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because, slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me to Hypnos's arms. I relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from my chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked once more. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified, but when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. His voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms were bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood. Judging by the way they contorted, the blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like that till about 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbors had woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window returning to his home, entering at exactly 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep-deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. The sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusionary comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night, the image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door, haunting my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous and tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the house hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached the home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face the situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that had been his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing was different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we had shared. I was eager to get inside, past him, and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there weren't any scars, let alone wounds on his hands or arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now, because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. Really starting to get used to it. It wouldn't be such a big problem till yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door as usual. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his noisy night. I was about to go to my room, put on my headphones, and get some sleep when I passed the staircase facing the back door, and then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbors ask every night for me to let them in, and now there's something knocking on my back door, too. Miss Fiora, can you please come to school as soon as possible? Miss Morgan, the school guidance counselor, asked. Julian isn't hurt, but he's in a very serious situation. When I asked what happened, Miss Morgan said it was better to explain when I arrived. Bewildered and unnerved, I feared the worst when speculating what my 8-year-old might have done. Julian could sometimes be a bit unruly at home, but never once got into any trouble at school. Julian's teachers loved him, and he appeared to get along with all of his classmates, which made this so unusual. Despite pondering every conceivable scenario during the drive, I never would have guessed what my son had ultimately done in a million years. My stomach sank when I saw an ambulance and a trio of police cruisers in front of the school. After parking in the visitors' parking lot, I was greeted by Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Quatero, Julian's teacher, Mrs. Jones, the principal, and 2 police officers, one of whom happened to be my cousin, Brady. I noticed none of them looked angry. They all had the same disturbed looks of horror and disbelief across their face. Miss Fiora, thank you for coming so quickly, Miss Jones said. Where's my son? I asked anxiously. What did he do? He's with Miss Isbister right now, the school psychologist, Miss Jones quickly replied. Before I could ask any questions, Brady stepped forward and took me aside. Look, they figured it'd be best if I tell you what's going on, so brace yourself, Brady said softly, taking a breath before continuing. Julian brought a head to school, an actual human head. What? Was all I could gasp out, after not saying anything for a few seconds, unsure if I'd heard Brady correctly. He had it in his backpack. Did you see him leave the house today? I waited with him for the bus like I always do every morning. I was unsure if there was a hint of suspicion in Brady's voice. I had no reason to think anything out of the ordinary was going on. When I asked Brady what exactly happened, he motioned for Mr. Quatero, who slowly walked over to where I stood. Mr. Quatero was visibly distraught over the incident, as indicated by his trembling hand, ironically only having 4 fingers, when we briefly exchanged a shake. When Brady asked him to recount the happenings, Mr. Quatero swallowed nervously before beginning. The kids were supposed to have show and tell yesterday, but we just couldn't get to it in time, so I had them do it today before lunch, Mr. Quatero said, his face contorting with disgust while giving the account. When it was Julian's turn, he said he brought in a special friend. He just pulled it out of his pack like it was nothing in front of the whole class. Julian said the head was his Uncle Milty, Brady added. He doesn't have an Uncle Milty, I said, staring mystified at my cousin. Did he say where he found it? He said the head was growing from the ground in the woods behind your house. My blood ran cold and my mind started racing. I wasn't sure what rattled me more, Julian seeing and physically handling a human head, or the grim prospect that someone's remains were discarded a stone's throw away from where my family slept. Julian wasn't allowed in the woods bordering the backyard unsupervised, and even when permitted, knew he had to stay within view. When could he have made such a gruesome discovery without us knowing? Take me to my son. Julian was playing with Legos in Miss Isbister's office when I entered, seemingly unaware of the situation's severity. Miss Isbister said Julian was immediately brought here, while he and Mr. Quatero tried getting his class under control. When I asked if Julian explained why he did this, Mr. Isbister's answer sent a sharp chill down my spine. He said Uncle Milty told him to. Mr. Isbister let Brady and I speak with Julian alone in his office. My son was elated to see me, and seemed under the impression that this was some kind of special occasion. The innocent, unsuspecting look on his young face showed Julian appeared unaware that he'd done anything wrong, which for me made this ordeal extra difficult. Julian, do you know what's going on? I asked while sitting with him on the couch. Do you know why we're here right now? Julian's smile faded when he saw how concerned Brady and I looked. Julian, who's Uncle Milty? I asked, when my son's eyes started to wander around the office. You don't have an uncle with that name." "He lived in a hole behind our house," Julian said nonchalantly, appearing more interested in getting back to playing with the Legos. "I'm helping him find a new home." Brady and I looked at each other, both of us visibly perturbed by Julian's answer. "What do you mean, cuz?" Brady said quickly, seeing that I was at a loss for words. "Can you tell me exactly where you found the head? Uncle Milty?" Julian's smile returned. "I was trying to find a ball I hit really hard into the woods, and I found him sticking out of the ground." I knew the exact day Julian was referring to. This past Saturday afternoon. Julian and my husband had been playing baseball when he hit an absolute howitzer that sailed into the tree line. Although they spread out to find the ball, my husband said Julian was always within view. It took over half an hour for them to find it, and I do remember losing sight of them quite a few times while they searched. Julian must have found it then, I thought, becoming deeply unsettled when I imagined the naive look on his face when he made such a grisly discovery. "Would you be able to show us where you found him?" Brady asked. "And did you take Uncle Milty with you the day you found him?" Julian shook his head. "I visited him again before he told me to take him. He lived where the woodpile used to be." Julian was talking about a large mound of firewood in our backyard. It took a few days, but my husband and I had relocated all the wood to another part of the yard. Its original location was a few yards into the tree line. We wanted to build a shed there, but wound up finding a better spot, despite clearing the area. I nodded at Brady, indicating I knew the exact spot Julian was describing. "Julian, what do you mean when you said he told you to take him? Who are you talking to?" Julian looked at Brady perplexed. "Uncle Milty. He told me that I could take him with me." "So you've been talking to this Uncle Milty head, like how the three of us are talking right now?" I asked, tightly pursing my lips when Julian nodded his affirmation. "I don't know what I'd have said if someone told me earlier today my son would bring a human head into school that was also his imaginary friend." Mr. Isbister said Julian may have been severely traumatized by what he found, and imagined that the interactive qualities were a way of coping. When Julian was getting looked at by the school nurse, Brady took me to see if I recognized the head's face. The severed head was kept in an ice-filled cooler out in the ambulance. It was in a large, clear evidence bag, and looked to have only died fairly recently. I didn't recognize the man, who appeared to be in his 30s and had a bloated face with narrow cheeks, large black eyes, a Roman nose, thick pink lips, and short blonde hair. His eyes were still open, looking in different directions, and the mouth hung agape, its tongue partially protruding from between its teeth. The head's whitish-beige skin had patches of mottling, darkened veins, proverbial deathly gray tints synonymous with corpses. I only looked long enough to verify I didn't recognize the man's face, before having to suppress an upcoming urge to vomit. Julian was medically and physically evaluated before we were both interviewed by detectives at the police station. We didn't get home until later that night, and by then a forensics team had already set up shop on my property. Brady kept me informed and was at my house monitoring the situation. The whole area in front of my home was quarantined off by yellow police tape and jam-packed with a sundry of police vehicles. Brady and one of the detectives met me at the perimeter. I kept Julian near me while walking up to Brady and the other detective, who had me bring my son inside when we spoke. Our cadaver dogs instantly picked up a scent and brought us right to the spot your son mentioned. The detective, whose last name was Vendetto, began. "We unearthed a shallow grave containing the remains of a body. A headless body. Despite largely expecting this, hearing someone confirm that it was actually real made it no easier to accept. There was a corpse buried on my property that nobody probably would have found if we hadn't moved a heaping woodpile. A decomposing body my son had the misfortune of discovering. No child is ever meant to experience those kinds of realities life offers at such a delicate age. Although Julian maintained a reserved exterior thus far, I shuddered to think what actual thoughts and impacts this experience might have on my son. If it really was where the old woodpile used to be, which was there before I ever bought the house, it had to have been there for a long time, right? I inquired, particularly emphasizing how the woodpile predated when my family lived at the house. Well, that's the thing, Brady replied, getting an approving nod from Detective Vendetto. Whoever's head Julian found has probably only been dead for 7 or 8 days tops. The other remains were buried there for a while, years probably. I squinted in confusion at Brady and the detective. So, they're looking for a body right now. There's 2 out there. Maybe not here, Detective Vendetto said. We haven't found any more remains yet, but we think someone might have dismembered and dispersed another body, whose head your son found. It didn't make any sense. There was no way the head Julian found and decapitated remains they discovered were the same person, but I couldn't chalk up Julian finding the head where a set of other remains lay as a coincidence. Without any substantial proof, however, we were only left to speculate. Despite a thorough search of the woods behind my house and surrounding area, no additional human remains were ever found. Since the body was on our property, we had to be formally cleared of any wrongdoing. While undergoing that process, more peculiar happenings occurred. 2 days after the incident, Brady told me that the head Julian found went missing at the police station, seemingly disappeared overnight without a trace. 1 week later, Julian's teacher, Mr. Quattro, was killed. Only his severed head was discovered. The man's body was never found. My husband and I kept Julian out of school since that day, and were considering transferring him so he could have a fresh start. Hearing news of his teacher's demise, which I kept away from him, prompted us to go through with the move. Even before eventually selling the house, we packed up and relocated to a new town, Julian adjusting well, despite still receiving therapy to help him manage his understanding of what had happened, always speaking of Uncle Milty in high regard if he ever came up in the conversation. Our new home was closer to my job, and Julian made friends quickly at his new school. About 3 months passed since his show-and-tell incident. It was Julian's birthday, who I hadn't gotten a chance to call since my morning and early afternoon had been filled with back-to-back meetings and calls and appointments. I was already behind schedule and putting the final touches on a report that was 15 minutes past due. I heard my office door open, which I knew was my final appointment before lunch. Keeping my eyes glued to the computer screen, I told my client to sit tight for 5 minutes, determined to have this write-up finished and sent before shifting gears. I heard him mutter something under his breath in a disgruntled tone before walking up to one of the chairs in front of my desk. While finishing the report, I pulled up my calendar to view my meeting details, since my assistant made some last-minute changes to the morning schedule and failed to specify what they were before going to lunch. Soon as the appointment opened on my screen, however, I heard the abrupt footsteps of the client walking towards the door. "I'm so sorry about that. I didn't mean to be rude, but..." I was worried my inattentiveness may have rubbed him the wrong way, but I quickly pulled my eyes from the computer just as he was about to leave the office. I caught a long enough glimpse to remember his face, long and narrow with beady, sly-looking black eyes, reddish-pink lips that formed a half-smirk, a balding forehead, and short, dark hair. Adjusting his fleece-tall neck collar, he looked at me with disgust and disappointment before closing the door behind him with his hand. I quickly stood up and tried to gesture for the man to stay, kicking myself for being so inconsiderate and dreading the possible ramifications of this misstep. He looked oddly familiar, I thought while hurrying across my office. Hoping to catch him, I swung the door open, but he was already gone, stomping away in frustration. I slowly shut the door, thankful my assistant didn't witness my spectacle. Turning back to face my office, I froze after noticing a package on one of the chairs. It was a square box about 14 by 14 and gift-wrapped in plaid red and green paper. There was a card taped to the top of the package, addressed to my son. Upon reading it, I was hit with a spinning lightheadedness when I remembered where I had previously seen that man's face. "Dear Julian, wishing you a happy birthday, as promised. Thank you again for helping me to get a new look. We'll talk soon. Uncle Milty." I stood there, holding the card in my shaky hands, constantly rereading the handwritten note inside of it, while trying to comprehend who was just in my office. However, it wasn't his face being that of a severed head Julian had found, which had filled me with paralyzing terror. The man's hands he'd used to shut the office door behind him with only had 4 fingers.